So we've got some really great presentations to share with you this morning. We're going to move through each presenter. We'll have some time to present, and then we're going to go into Q&A immediately following each presenter. I'd encourage you to use the Q&A panel over on your screen in order to post your questions. My name is Eric Olson. I'll be the moderator, and I'll be communicating those questions back to the audience. Back to the presenters, so that they can answer them at the appropriate time. I do see that the live stream does appear to be working, and I'm not going to do extensive introductions of people. We're really fortunate that all of our presenters are kind of on the platform. If you're in Event Mobi, you see their names down there underneath the presentation. I encourage you to learn more about them and the programs that they work with. We have such a diverse set of nonprofits and state agencies that are working on water issues in Wisconsin. So each one of them is fairly unique. We're going to start with Katie Belfus. She is the outreach person at Wisconsin Wetlands Association. This is a statewide group that really obviously advocates for and educates people all about wetlands. And today, of course, she's going to just be talking about how wetlands and lakes are connected and what people can do to help the wetlands do their job. So I'll give it over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm super happy to be here today to talk with you about how wetlands can help your lake and how you can help wetlands. So let's get started. So a little bit about the Wisconsin Wetlands Association. We are a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan conservation organization, and we help people and communities care for wetlands. We like to say we like to help people see wetlands as solutions to the water-based challenges that their communities face, whether that's flood damages or water quality challenges or other issues. We are a member-supported organization, so if you are not already a member of Wisconsin Wetlands Association, we invite you to join us, and you can learn more about our work at wisconsinwetlands.org, and I'll have that URL again at the end of the talk. So one of the first questions I get when I do this presentation, I have this fruit fly in my office, oh dear, is just what is a wetland? And so really quickly, of course, I think all of us would see this as a wetland. You have your cattails, you got your water birds, you got your open water. It's a pretty standard image of what people, I think, mostly think about when they think about wetlands. But I wanted to run really quickly through some other pictures of wetland types found in Wisconsin so that you can see the wide variety that we have in terms of wetlands here in Wisconsin, much beyond a cattail marsh. We have sedge meadows and low prairies, more grassy looking kinds of communities. Fen is another kind of wetland that might look a little bit more like a prairie. It's a super rare specialized community found only in areas with special mineral-rich groundwater. Bogs, another specialized type, usually acidic and more often found in northern Wisconsin. Shrub thickets, and I love this photo because this is exactly what it looks like to be in a shrub thicket. They're very dense, very hard to get through areas. We have alder thickets mostly in northern Wisconsin and shrub carr in southern Wisconsin. Wetlands can also be forested, can also have trees. One forested wetland type is floodplain forest, super important along our big rivers in particular. Forested swamps, which can be both coniferous with trees like tamaracks and black spruce, excuse me. Also black ash and green ash deciduous swamps happen as well in Wisconsin. And ephemeral and seasonal ponds. And my guess is that these are some of the most overlooked wetlands in Wisconsin because they just don't look like wetlands most of the time. They are very wet in the spring with snow melt and spring rains. And then slowly over the course of the year, by fall, they're pretty much dried out. Very important for amphibian reproduction, for breeding. And if you go to some of these little ephemeral and seasonal ponds in another, I don't know, couple of weeks, hopefully, you will start hearing the joy of frogs in spring. So very important, under-mapped, I think, in our wetland mapping and under-recognized. So very, very important. So how can wetlands help your lake? I want to move on to that, but instead of telling you about it myself, I'm going to share with you a short video that we made recently that'll sum it up in about 4 minutes.
Do you remember fishing with your grandpa, catching frogs at the water's edge? Some of these precious childhood memories of nature tie back to wetlands. Wetlands occur between the places that are always wet and the places that are always dry. Not only do they give us great memories, they also protect the health and safety of our communities. They reduce flood damages, help keep our waters clean, and ensure we have water to drink and use in our businesses. But the ability of wetlands to provide these benefits depends on how we use and manage our land and water. Across much of the state, the changes we have made to our landscape have disrupted this ability. And as a result, we're seeing more flood damages and water quality problems. The good news is that wetlands can be an important part of the solutions to these problems. And by understanding how wetlands work, we can begin the exciting process of restoring wetlands to help heal Wisconsin's waters. Because water flows downhill, we can't fix issues downstream if we don't fix problems upstream. So let's start at the top and look at how it's all connected. The watershed. A watershed is an area where all surface waters, lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands, drain to a shared body of water. But wetlands in different parts of a watershed manage water in different ways. Wetlands in the upper parts of a watershed form in low spots on the land. These wetlands capture, store, and slowly release runoff from rain and snowmelt. They may not always look like wetlands. They're wet in spring and dry by late summer, and often they don't even appear to be connected to streams or rivers, but they are critical. Here's how. Individually, these wetlands may be small, but they can be locally abundant. Together, they hold and manage a lot of water and literally slow the flow, allowing the water to soak into the ground. This reduces erosion and flood peaks and helps protect downstream roads and neighborhoods. Wetlands in the middle part of a watershed form along rivers and creeks, giving them room to swell during high water. They are most commonly known as floodplain wetlands. When floodwaters spread out across a floodplain, they slow down and spread out. Slower moving water has less erosion-causing energy, and water that can spread out means lower flood peaks downstream. Wetlands in the lower parts of a watershed form where rivers empty into larger bodies of water, especially lakes. Where rivers flatten out, the current disperses and the river drops its load of sediments and other material. This makes the water that enters the lake cleaner and clearer, which means better fishing, swimming, and boating. So are the wetlands near you healthy and abundant enough to support watershed health, or are they too damaged to do the work you need them to do? If you don't know the answer, you're not alone. But if you're concerned about water quality and flooding and care about fish and wildlife, encouraging your community to explore how local wetlands are or are not supporting watershed health is a great place to start. Working together, we can use wetlands as solutions in our communities. And at the same time, we can ensure that our kids and grandkids create the same treasured childhood memories we hold dear.
Okay. For some information here, if you are interested, we created that video certainly for our own use, but also for folks like you to use in your work to protect water in your community. So it's available for download from our website, and you can share it with your neighbors, with elected officials in your community to help bring this information to more people if that would be useful to you. So to review, wetlands provide a lot of natural benefits, and I think you can probably see all the ways that wetlands can help lakes. And certainly I'd encourage you to, when you say things like rivers, lakes, and streams, that you throw wetlands in the mix, because the water's all connected. And I'm grateful to the Extension Lakes folks, because they really get that at this conference, that wetlands are part of all of the water in Wisconsin and elsewhere. So some of these benefits from wetlands: they protect our communities from flooding. They reduce runoff energy, and that's what they're talking about, slowing the flow. This photo is of an upper watershed wetland that's not doing so well. The water is coursing through, and as you can see, it's really down cutting in this stream and causing this enormous gully, because the wetland there is not doing what it needs to be doing in terms of slowing the flow and absorbing those waters. So wetlands can very much do that when they are in the right place and doing well. They clean agricultural runoff. These two photos were taken on the same road on the same day, right after a storm. The one on the left is on the side of the road with a bare agricultural field, and you can see how brown the water is. And the one on the right, on the other side of the road, is an area where an agricultural field was restored back to wetlands. And you can see that the water coming off that field is clean and clear. So it makes a big difference. And certainly there's other things that help with that too, in terms of agricultural practices, but wetlands can be a really big part of contributing to that cleaner water. And of course, then clean water quality, not just from sort of surface runoff, but also through the fact that by slowing the flow, it provides the water a chance to seep into the ground. When the water slow down and spread out on the floodplains, again, the sediment that might be in that water has a chance to settle out. So both of those things help improve water quality. Certainly wetlands protect our shorelines. They can help, the wetland vegetation can help reduce wave action, among other things, to protect shorelines from erosion. We're talking a lot more about carbon and climate change, and wetlands store carbon. The plant material that grows every year in a wetland and sinks into the water at the end of the year, that's trapping that carbon, because in a watery environment, in an anoxic environment, that plant material doesn't decompose, but rather builds up and stores that carbon away. When we drain soils like this, we introduce oxygen into the mix, which starts that decomposition process, and that actually releases a lot of the trapped carbon. So not only do we need to protect wetlands because they help store carbon, we need to protect wetlands so that we don't release that carbon into the atmosphere. Certainly lots of other important benefits, trout and lakefish habitat, you all know about that. Wildlife habitat, 75% of Wisconsin's wildlife use wetlands at some point during their lifetime. Great for recreation, anybody who paddles knows that. Education and cultural uses. And I really appreciated the comments in the opening session this morning with Patty Lowe and Edith, talking about the cultural importance of the wetlands in their community. In this photos here, this is basket weaving that the Oneida Basket Weavers Guild does as part of their cultural practices. They hammer the logs of the ash trees and peel off layers of the tree and make baskets about it. It was a very fascinating experience to watch that happen. One of many cultural uses that happen from the products of wetlands. So historically, Wisconsin was a very wetland-rich state. We had more than 10 million acres during pre-development times, about a third of Wisconsin's acreage. That's like having one wet foot every 3 to 4 steps taken. It's a lot of wetlands, but we have lost half of those original 10 million acres of wetlands, and many that remain are altered and degraded. And of course, that wetland loss is not spread equally across the state. The darker red areas in this map, more wetland loss has occurred. And so certainly, clearly, southern Wisconsin has lost more wetlands than northern Wisconsin, which is great for those of you up north, for all of us who enjoy the north. And if you compare this map to a map of our impaired waterways in Wisconsin, there's amazing overlap, and that's no accident. And of course, when we lose wetlands, as we've said, we see a lot of challenges: flooding, gullying, erosion, infrastructure damage, water quality challenges, the list goes on. So how do we turn it around? Preventing wetland loss is important, but it's not enough. We need protection, restoration, and management of wetlands. We need to put hundreds of thousands of acres of wetlands back on the landscape to bring back the important natural benefits they provide. And we don't need just acreage any old where. We need to be strategic. We need to take a watershed and landscape approach to where we're doing wetland restoration to get more wetlands back on the landscape, but in the right locations to solve the problems that are happening in that watershed. Just like you saw in the video, different wetlands in different parts of the landscape provide different kinds of benefits. We need to be strategic about where we do wetland restoration. So I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to skip this second video, which tells the lovely story of the Stone Lake community in northern Wisconsin, but I will get it into the chat box later, where you can find this lovely video about what they did. They saw wetlands as an important tool for protecting the quality of their lake, and that wetlands also could help their community be strong. So I'm sorry that we're going to not have time to do that. I practiced this talk, but I always get excited about talking about wetlands and I'd say too much. So how can you help your lake and help wetlands? Look upstream. It's important to look around your lake at what's going on and in your lake, but make sure you're looking upstream. As we saw in the video, what's happening upstream in a watershed is very important for what's happening downstream, and you can't solve downstream problems without solving upstream conditions. Look back. look at the history of your area. There's public land surveys. This cool map is a historic map from the 1830s-ish, middle 1800s, when the public land surveys were first conducted in Wisconsin. And they can give you some really fascinating information about what the landscape looked like way back then. There's lots of aerial photos via Google Earth and local county offices. Tracy Hames did a cool presentation on Monday afternoon about some different tools that are available. So check that recording out once it's available, and pay attention to historic land use. And then what's changed between now and then, or between then and now, I guess I should say, especially with regard to water flow. How is water flow different on the landscape now than it was then? Of course, we're not going to get rid of roads. We're not going to take down villages, but we can mimic some of those natural conditions as they used to be through some modern innovations. And so how can we protect wetlands in our community, and how can restore wetlands in our communities in order to address the challenges that are facing our communities and our lakes? You can also volunteer, and I know many of you do that, and you can get involved in community planning, also something I know many of you do, making sure that folks in your communities and around your lake are thinking about wetlands and watersheds in their planning efforts, and bringing the power of wetlands to solutions in their planning. Support local groups, whether those are in your community or they're statewide groups like the Wisconsin Wetlands Association. And you can learn a lot through these organizations, and it's a great way to also meet other people who are doing similar issues and work together to find answers to your challenges. And most importantly, get your feet wet. Our mission at Wisconsin Wetlands Association includes the protection, restoration, and enjoyment of wetlands, because spending time in wetlands is a critical part of making sure that they get protected, fall in love with them, learn about them, and have fun. So I appreciate the time here today. I hope I've shared a little bit of information that's helpful to you in this short time, and I'd be happy to take any questions in any minutes that we might have remaining.
Thank you, Katie. We do have time for questions, so I would encourage people, if you want to ask a question, pop it over in the Q&A. I'm always full of questions, so I won't hesitate to ask. We're seeing some lake groups actually starting to work with neighboring landowners to take cranberry bogs out of production and restore them as wetlands. Do you have a sense, Katie, is that something that maybe could happen more around Wisconsin? And what are the complications maybe of thinking like, let's do wetland restoration on sort of a multi-acre scale like that?
Well, certainly we want a huge scale of wetland restoration. We are not going to get what we need on the landscape without wetland restoration at a large scale. And certainly cranberries are a natural wetland product. Of course, as we have with lots of other natural products, we've turned them into monocultures because that's an efficient way to get that crop. And so cranberry bogs are, there were a lot of them installed in Wisconsin and other areas when, you know, craisins were the new rage food-wise, and many of them are, there's been a glut in the market. So a lot of cranberry farmers are no longer able to make their money from that resource. So the challenge is they're not wetlands anymore. They're agricultural fields. And so I think we have to sort of think about that in the same way. They are typically built in places where wetlands were, because there's water availability there. So it is definitely possible. It definitely is an opportunity. It's wetland restoration won't necessarily, of course, cover the revenue that the farmers need, but it is an opportunity to put more wetlands back on the landscape. It might be sort of challenging because of the infrastructure that's associated with cranberry bogs, but definitely an opportunity.
Yeah, I'd say the example I know up in Sawyer County, they're purchasing the land from the farmer. So the farmer is kind of taking it out of production, and then they're going to think about how to do the restoration. I just know from trying to put a rain garden in my own backyard, it's a lot of work. And so to multiply that to tens of acres, wetlands don't just come back by themselves, I guess is what I'm driving at.
No, I think that's right. But I would push back a little bit on your rain garden analogy, because often we're putting rain gardens in urban environments where they weren't wetlands normally, right? They're not wetlands. They are really great tools for capturing runoff from roofs and driveways and whatnot. But they are you're not necessarily restoring a wetland. You're putting in a tool, right? And when you're actually restoring wetlands in areas where they occurred historically, that's areas that the landscape already wants to have, the water already wants to be there. And we've spent a lot of time and energy draining the water and redirecting the water to be able to farm some of these areas. And talk about time intensive, holy smokes. And a lot of times that drainage only lasts for a period of time, and then the benefits stop after a while. You don't see the great return on that investment after a while. So lots of opportunities. It's not to say it's not hard, but sometimes when you do things at a bigger scale, the scale actually makes them easier overall, rather than doing something on a very manicured scale in your yard. Both are important in their own way.
Sure. Quick question from the audience. What would you say has been your most effective educational strategies?
I think getting people together on the land. We do a lot of field-based workshops and trainings, whether for decision makers, legislators, or private individual landowners, and getting folks who are curious about wetlands and want to do more for the wetlands on their property or in their communities to actually get out on the ground and talk about and look at and feel and see the conditions. Those are the real light bulb moments for us, because people really get it. It's fine to talk abstractly, but you got to get your feet wet to really understand what's going on.
That's great. I love to see the idea of people getting out and exploring the wetlands, putting on some nice waterproof boots and seeing what's going on out there.
Definitely.
Katie, there's some other technical questions in the Q&A, and I know you know how to interact with the site. So I'm going to let you kind of drill over there and maybe use the comments to answer some of these other questions. And I just want to thank you again for sharing this presentation, and we'll move on to the second presenter. So thank you.
Thank you.